Hello, everyone, and thank you all for joining us this evening for our webinar, Protecting Yourself from Fraud and Scams. My name is Kelly Schweppe, and I'm the Program Marketing Specialist here at General Electric Credit Union. We're so glad you've joined us for today's topic, and we're excited to continue to bring you insight right from the comfort of your home, work, or wherever you are. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Todd Lindgren with the FBI Cincinnati Division to introduce himself and take us through today's topic.
Well, thank you, Kelly. I appreciate you having me here tonight, and I appreciate General Electric Credit Union hosting this presentation. Again, my name is Todd Lindgren, and I've been with the FBI for almost 12 years and serve as the Public Affairs Officer for the Cincinnati Division. And then part of this role includes speaking to community groups about the FBI and working to help prevent crime through community awareness presentations like this. I want to take just a moment to talk briefly about the FBI. So most people will never have contact with an FBI agent or employee, but we are over 30,000 people working across the nation and the globe to keep people safe on a daily basis. The FBI's mission is to protect the American people and defend the U.S. Constitution. This includes protecting the public from terrorism, arresting spies, investigating public corruption, and protecting you from scams and financial crime as well. So one of our top criminal priorities is preventing and investigating financial fraud. So that's everything from the billion-dollar Bernie Madoff Ponzi schemes to embezzlements and some of the common frauds that we see as well. Our goal tonight is to help raise awareness about some of the frauds and scams so that you don't become a victim. So if everyone's ready, we'll get started on this topic. So the Internet Crime Complaint Center, or what we call IC3.gov, was created by the FBI and other agencies 20 years ago, and it basically serves as a clearinghouse for fraud reporting. They look at the different frauds being reported and they bundle similar cases, and then they refer those to the appropriate law enforcement agencies for investigation. So if you encounter a fraud situation online, or maybe over the phone or through other means, we recommend it be reported to IC3.gov for further review. Now, IC3 also collects a lot of data about the frauds that are reported to them, and they're a pretty good resource to look at common frauds as well as some trends that they are seeing. So I pulled some of the statistics, and over the last 5 years, there have been over 1.7 million complaints to IC3.gov. And these losses total over $10 billion. So we want to help prevent these frauds from occurring and work to reduce these losses, and that's why we're talking about this topic here tonight. Unfortunately, Ohio was one of the top victim states if you look at the IC3.gov statistics. Ohio's 12th on the list of states with the most victims, over 9,000 just last year. If you look at the amount of losses, Ohio was third, over 264 million, which is a rough average of over $28,000 per victim. So as you can see from these stats, our friends and our neighbors, they're losing a lot of money due to frauds and scams. And so the more we can educate people, the better. So this chart shows some of the top frauds by the type of scam that was reported to IC3.gov. And if you take a look at it, you can see that phishing is the top scam. Now, phishing you may be aware of. It's the act of sending an email that falsely claims to be from a legitimate business, and they're trying to get you to, the recipient to divulge personal sensitive information like passwords or maybe credit card numbers, even bank account information. It's usually done by directing the user to a specific website through a link. It often looks real, it looks like it's coming from a legitimate source, but it's taking you to a website that is set up only to steal your user information. We'll talk a little bit more about this and some of the other top scams in a bit. So if you look at this next chart, it shows the amount of money attributed to the different types of scams, and it's ranked by the money lost. So the BEC scam is the top scam. That's called the Business Email Compromise Scam. And it's the top, if you see, with a whopping $1.7 billion reported loss just last year. BEC usually targets businesses and schools and nonprofits, generally organizations that wire or transfer money to vendors and contractors electronically. So fortunately, it's not a scam that usually targets individuals. We have some tools the FBI does where we can possibly stop these, working with some of our partners if we're notified quickly enough, if it meets certain dollar amounts. However, there's still a lot of money being lost through this method, as you can see. Looking at the list, one of the things that I find kind of surprising is that romance fraud is the second highest grossing fraud, with $475 million lost just last year. We also know a lot of victims of romance scams don't report that they've been victimized because they're often either embarrassed that they've been a victim or ashamed, so it doesn't go reported that often. So the actual amount lost due to these scams was probably much, much higher. So now let's just talk about a little more about how some of these frauds occur. So fraud can definitely occur through all kinds of means, but these are probably the most common that we see. So on the computer, it might be through an email, an internet scam, or maybe an app that you have. Through the postal mail that you receive in your mailbox, could be some sort of written fraud scams sent straight to you. On the phone, we often see that callers are spoofing their phone numbers and they're pretending to be someone legitimate, maybe asking for money or even threatening you for money. Nowadays with mobile phones and the amount of text that we receive, we're even seeing scams through text messages, and we'll talk a little bit about those later as well. And finally, in person. These aren't as common as they used to be because it's so much easier for people to try to be anonymous online or over the phone, and they think it's harder for law enforcement to catch them. But we do still see some scams. They're committed in person. Healthcare fraud's one of those, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. All right, so I thought we'd get into some of the common fraud schemes that we see. Credit card fraud, elder fraud, healthcare fraud, identity theft, and internet fraud are very common fraud schemes that we see very often. And so I want to just raise your awareness about some of these. So credit card fraud has probably been around about as long as credit cards have been, I would think. By definition, it's really the unauthorized use of a credit card or a debit card to obtain something of value. So when General Electric Credit Union or a bank or the issuer of your card provides you with a card to make regular purchases, on a monthly basis, you make payments to the bank for your balance. But in your agreement with the issuer, there's probably a list of certain purchases that you may not be responsible for if you're the victim of a fraud. So if this occurs, you need to report the fraud as soon as possible so they can put a hold on your transaction and issue you a new card. Credit card numbers are pretty easily stolen from different websites where you make purchases or even at the point of sale. So if you think about it, when you give your card, when you're at a restaurant, you give your card to a waiter or a waitress and they disappear for a few minutes to take care of your bill, you're putting a lot of trust in that person and what they're doing with your card. And we have seen cases where a worker may copy your card information and try to use it later to make purchases online. A lot of telemarketer scams are also trying to get your credit card information over the phone. They're trying to get you to divulge that number to you. So always be cautious of that, who you're giving your number to, who you're giving your card to as well. You may not know this, but it is actually incredibly cheap for criminals to buy real credit card numbers on the dark web and other places. Some of these criminal internet sites, they can sell for under $20 with your credit card number, the expiration date, your CVV code, and the information about the cardholder, like your address, zip code, and other details, anything that they might need to make purchases. And then they can try to use these information to make purchases on your card. So it's always important to look over your credit card statement, look at the purchases that are on there, and verify that those are indeed purchases that you've made and that nothing on there is fraudulent. So we're going to talk a little bit more about elder fraud as well. So sadly, scams that target older Americans continue to be very prevalent. Seniors are often targeted because they tend to be more trusting. They may have accumulated a financial nest egg, they probably have good credit, and have more assets in general. So since the fraudsters are looking for potential victims with money, they often target seniors. Last year, the Internet Crime Complaint Center received over 68,000 complaints from victims over the age of 60 with adjusted losses in excess of $835 million. That's a lot of money. If you're to average that out, that's about $12,000 per victim. So clearly the fraudsters are making off with quite a bit of money when they are successfully targeting seniors. There's a number of different scams that fall under the larger heading of senior fraud, and we're going to talk about just a few of them, including the grandparent scam, the sweepstakes and lottery scams, and the tech support scam. So the grandparent scam is usually over the phone or could be through text messages. And in this scam, a criminal will actually call or text pretending to be a relative, usually a child or grandchild, and they often claim that something bad has happened, like they got arrested by the police, or maybe their car broke down on a long road trip and it needs a lot of money to repair it. And they're going to ask for either money to be wired to them or gift card numbers, but they need it immediately. There's usually a lot of pressure involved in this scam. The scammers will often call at night to wake up their victims and make it sound like an emergency. So they'll call in the middle of the night, wake you up, and they put that extra pressure on you to make a decision when you may be groggy or maybe not thinking straight. And they also target peak times of the year. These people can be pretty sophisticated, so they know that a lot of students go on spring break in the spring, and so that time of year they'll often pose as college students who may be traveling to make the interaction seem even more believable. So if you receive a call like this, it's really important just to slow down. Ask for the number where to call back, and then call a trusted relative like the grandchild's parents and ask if their child really is traveling and if they've reached out for help. The scammers will often ask that you don't call the parents or relatives or the person supposedly in the distress, because they tell you that their parents would be angry at them if they find out and they don't want anyone else to know. But take that extra step, slow down, call and verify with people that you trust. It's important that you don't get rushed into any decision and that you always take the time to confirm what is truly occurring. Now, lots of times in these scams, we'll see that the scammers will actually ask you to send them gift cards or prepaid money card numbers, like from a Green Dot card. If you ever see that, someone asking for gift cards or prepaid money card numbers, it's almost always a scam. These are easy for fraudsters to turn into cash, and they're difficult for law enforcement to trace. So the scammers will ask you to purchase these cards and send them the information either electronically or maybe over the phone. And if someone asks you to pay this way, it is almost always a scam. So another scam that we see often targeting older people is the lottery or sweepstakes scam. In this kind of event, you may receive a call or a text saying that you want a trip or some money, but in order to collect the prize, you have to provide a credit card number or some other form of payment to cover the taxes and fees. Now, I know I'd like to win the Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstakes and have those people come to my house knocking on my door with that giant check, but really, there's a lot of people out there who are actually trying to take your money, not give you money. So if you didn't enter a sweepstakes or a lottery, you didn't win. A legitimate organization won't ask you for money or your credit card number if you win a prize. So be smart. Just don't give out your money or your personal information. So another ongoing common fraud is the tech support scam, and you may have heard of this before. Unfortunately, it is still going on. It's been around for many years. IC3 received over 13,000 of these complaints just last year. There's about $54 million lost in these reported complaints. This is a 40% increase from the previous year. So the scam continues to grow and continues to steal a lot of people's money, unfortunately. The majority of victims of tech support scams were older Americans. I think the fraudsters believe that seniors may be more trusting and maybe a little less tech savvy, so they prey on them as their targets. So the scam usually revolves around someone contacting you, often over the phone, about a computer issue that maybe you didn't even know that you had. They claim to be from a computer company's customer support, or maybe the computer company's security division, or technical support. And they'll claim that there's an issue with your computer and either ask for your personal information and passwords, or ask to remotely take control of your computer under the pretext of trying to fix your problem. So if you give them access to your computer, think about it. They have access to all your files and all the information on your computer. That could include your banking records or maybe your tax returns. Anything that you could have stored on your computer, they now have access to. So it's really important to never give control of your computer to someone unless you initiated the call, either to technical service, and you looked up a legitimate phone number for the company you want to contact. Another version of this we see sometimes is some sort of malware on your computer. And that's when you receive like a pop-up window on your screen stating that your computer has been infected and that you have to pay a fee for it to go away. So lately, one variation that we've seen has been going around that says you viewed illegal photos involving some sort of exploitation, and the FBI is going to arrest you unless you pay a fee right away. Again, these are scams. Definitely ignore it. If the pop-up won't go away, talk to someone you trust about a possible fix. There's sometimes things online that can remove these malware programs from your machine, or you can always take it to a legitimate repair shop. So this is a press release from a recent case in which a man was prosecuted for pretending to be a tech support agent and trying to help remove malware from victims' computers. In reality, he was really a scammer who stole personal banking information off the computers of senior citizens, and then he passed it to accomplices who could loot their accounts. The intended loss was over $600,000, and all of the victims were over the age of 65. So again, he's preying on older people who are trusting and may not be as tech savvy, and he's trying to steal their information in order to get to their bank accounts. So the National Department of Justice maintains an elder fraud hotline. If you think you're a victim of some sort of elder fraud crime, you can call this number to report the crime and also receive assistance from the Department of Justice. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to discuss healthcare fraud, which really continues to grow at a pretty rapid pace as the healthcare industry grows as well. In healthcare fraud schemes, we usually see people and the government losing money through a different variety of scams. And often what the scammer wants is your healthcare information, your insurance information, really. They may want to try to bill programs like Medicare and Medicaid then for some services that you never actually received. So these scammers can be pretty creative in how they acquire information. Some methods to be especially cautious of are offers for free screenings that don't come from legitimate organizations or your local government. So if there's a health fair in your community that includes free screenings, and they're sponsored by organizations that you know and you trust, then you're probably fine. But if you encounter one of these groups offering free screenings and they want your medical information, I'd be very cautious. There are also some of these groups out there that may offer you incentives to visit a specific clinic. You may have seen like flyers or postcards advertising that you can get a free gift card, maybe to a restaurant or a retail store if you visit a clinic for a free consultation. Well, as you probably know, nothing in life is free. So what these people really want is access to your health information so they can try to scam you and the government. So be very wary of these free offers, especially if they're from either practices you're not familiar with and that may not be so established in the community. There are definitely some steps you can take to not be a victim of healthcare fraud. First, we recommend you always protect your health insurance information and only provide it to professionals that you know and that you trust. We also recommend that you don't ever sign blank authorization forms stating the provider can bill your insurance company for whatever they decide to list on the form. I also recommend talking to the provider about what services are needed and their costs, what may be billed to your insurance company, and what you're expected to pay out of pocket. These are all important conversations to have to make sure that you and the government aren't going to overpay for any kind of healthcare services either rendered or maybe not rendered. So it's always good practice to keep records of your medical appointments and the services that you do receive. Just like your credit card statement, review your healthcare statement from your provider, as well as your insurance statement to make sure that you understand what's listed and that you actually receive those services. The scammers are definitely targeting you, but they're also targeting the government through false billing to Medicare and Medicaid. that pay out billions of dollars in legitimate fees every year to doctors and healthcare practitioners, and people have caught on to that and tried to scam them as well. And ultimately, we all pay more for healthcare when they're successful in deceiving the government. I know your healthcare bills can be confusing. I know mine are. So if you have questions, definitely seek out help from a trusted source to look over those with you. All right, so another form of fraud that doesn't seem to go away is identity theft. And this occurs when someone uses your identity. Often it's a social security number or some sort of other official identification to commit a crime. We see people trying to open credit cards or take out loans with a person's stolen identity very often, and that's how they make some sort of money. So it's important, again, to review your banking and your credit card statements to look for any abnormal transactions. If you're concerned about something in your statement, report it to your bank or credit card company right away. The sooner you report it, the better. It's also a good idea to review your credit report at least one time per year to look for any irregularities. That's where a loan might pop up that might have been taken out in your name and you didn't know about it. We'll talk a little bit more how you can do that at the end as well. And then I still think it's a good idea to shred any personal documents just to make it harder for people to steal your information. A lot of identities these days are actually stolen through data breaches of large computer networks, companies that you may do business with. But I still think it's a good idea to shred your personal documents. The harder you can make it for someone to steal your personal information, really the better. So speaking of online data breaches, internet fraud is pretty much everywhere, and you may be aware of this. There's so much information out there as we shop online and do business online. There's money to be made out there as well. So the scammers have moved online as well. So this could probably be a whole separate presentation just on different types of internet fraud. But I'm just going to highlight a couple of the areas to look out for. And I mentioned before the act of phishing. Phishing is one of those scams that's been around for a long time, but it continues to work. And that's why the scammers continue to do it. They're very smart though, and they change what it looks like and the patterns that they use, and they come up with these different variations to try to trick us. So it usually involves receiving some sort of email from a company or service you use in reality, and they ask you to maybe update your password or your credit card information. And the scammers want you to click on a link and input your information so they can capture it. The messages can look real, they can look legitimate, but it's really important not to click on any of these links in these emails. I've seen them from companies like Apple and Amazon and financial institutions, all kinds of different companies, and they look real. They're using real logos, they're using language that's very similar to what these companies would use, but there's something off about them usually, and they have some sort of link on there that they want you to click to take you to a fraudulent website. So if you see something like this and even think it might be legitimate, just don't click on the link in the email. You can always open a separate web browser, go to your account if you do business with these companies, and see if there's any issues with your account. Or another option would be just to call the company yourself and ask if your accounts are okay, if any new information is needed to update those accounts. But you find the number, don't use a number or a link in those emails that they send you. That's what they want you to use. Go out and find your own, do your own research, find the legitimate company's number and give them a call or go to their real website. So another top internet fraud involves not receiving something you purchased online, or maybe you got something, but it was misrepresented like in this photo. So if you're making purchases online, be sure to be going through trustworthy retailers. It's always a good idea to use a credit card, and I would suggest never wiring money. Once you wire money, it's very difficult to get back. So if you never receive the item, your credit card company may not force you to pay for it. Of course, this kind of depends on their fraud policies, but they all have different policies about what you have to pay for if you don't receive the merchandise. If you see a deal on a website that really seems too good to be true, it probably is. It's best to avoid these types of once-in-a-lifetime deals. Otherwise, we may end up with that tiny tricycle and not the fancy motorcycle you thought you were buying. So I'm going to cover just a few more frauds that we commonly see. I mentioned at the beginning that victims of romance scams reported losing over $475 million last year. That's a lot to pay for love. So this is how that works. Romance scams usually involve people who are meeting on legitimate internet dating sites, and they start to have a conversation. The scammers are really pros at this, and they quickly gain the victim's trust. They usually seem to be very caring and genuine and believable. And there's a lot of people out there who are looking for someone to talk to and just have some companionship. And the scammers know this, and unfortunately, they use people's emotions and their trust to their advantage. So as these online relationships progress, the scammers will often say that they can't meet in person. They're overseas for work, or maybe they're in the military, and so they can't meet in person, but they continue to build these relationships. And they often go on for weeks or months, again, just building trust with that person. And then at some point, when they feel it's appropriate, there's usually some sort of request for money. So they ask for funds, maybe they need a plane ticket, or they need help with their rent, or some other financial help. And by this time, the victim's so attached to this online love, and they want to help this person. And the scammers are really experts at this, at developing these relationships and stringing along the victims where they take as much money as they can. So a few tips to avoid these scams. Just be very careful about the personal information you post online. I always say that the less you put out there, the better. If you are involved in some sort of conversation with someone online, research the other individual. Even look for their photos of them online. Often these scammers will use similar photos or some sort of stock photo, and it may appear on other sites, and that may indicate that it's fraudulent. Probably most important is just to go very slow in these encounters. Look for warning signs, like the person saying they can't meet, that they're out of the country, or if during this relationship they start asking you for some sort of financial information or financial support. So when in doubt, just like everything else, we always recommend that you talk to someone you trust and someone who knows you well. If you tell them about the relationship, they might be able to tell you if it's something that seems legitimate or not. But in the end, it is always best to just never send money. You don't know what those person's intentions are, while they may be pulling at your heartstrings and you may be emotionally connected to them. Oftentimes they're just fraudsters, either in our country or overseas, who are trying to get access to your money. So I put in another press release. This is just from a couple of months ago, just to show you that this is recent. It's going on all the time, all over the country. This one's out of St. Louis, but it's showing you that these scams are really happening every day. So in this case, there were 3 men who were arrested after scamming dozens of women out of over $500,000. And some of the funds were actually transferred to Nigeria, which might indicate that these guys are part of a larger international crime ring. But the women were all ages 45 to 82. They're looking for some sort of online romance, and these guys took their money to the tune, again, of $500,000. Fortunately, they were caught, but a lot of them don't get caught just because it's hard to trace them through the internet, and often they're overseas, not in the United States. All right, so a different kind of scam that you may have heard of is the law enforcement scam or the IRS government scam. And these scams, you usually receive a phone call stating that you owe the government some sort of money. It could be an unpaid tax bill or maybe fines from a court. There's just a number of different varieties. And many of these calls will actually spoof government phone numbers to make them look legitimate on your caller ID. So when you're getting that call, it may say it's from the FBI or the IRS or from Hamilton County Courts or whatever. But really it's a scammer who just modified that number to make it look like something it wasn't. Some of these callers can actually be threatening. They can get pretty aggressive, and sometimes they'll yell at people saying that if they don't pay immediately, they're going to be arrested and put in jail. So if you ever receive one of these calls, the best thing to do is really just to hang up. Just know that the government will never call you asking you to pay some sort of fine or fee. If you really did owe money from the government, we're pretty antiquated. We use mail. We use formal letters that we'll send to you with contact information, details of your case that can all be verified. So we just ask that if you get a call like this, hang up. It is not the government calling you. So here's another press release with some details of a recent case. This is a man out of Illinois who is being sentenced in Boston, where he'd scammed some people. He was sentenced to 40 months in prison for this type of fraud, which is pretty good for this kind of fraud. He called different people claiming that he was with the IRS and threatened to arrest them if they didn't pay back taxes and fines immediately. He told the victims to pay using those stored value money cards or money pack cards, which is a big red flag. Like I said before, if anyone ever asks you to pay with these money cards, that they're probably a scammer. And this guy was connected to over $800,000 that was stolen from victims. He was just one of many people involved, but I think he was the one in the United States. A lot of these money was going overseas, but he was one that we caught, and again was sentenced to 40 months in prison. So another issue we're seeing a lot of recently is a type of phishing scam related to package delivery services. These delivery scams are popping up both in email and text form, and we all like to receive packages from FedEx or UPS or the Postal Service, and that's what this really exploits. These photos just show a couple of the examples of what you may see. Usually you're going to get a text or an email that's stating that the package delivery service couldn't deliver a package to your house, so you should contact them immediately with this link. Again, or they might send you something about new tracking information for a package you sent or are receiving. And they want you to click on that link for more details. But as we talked about before in phishing scams, these links are going to take you to a site that looks legitimate, but it's really controlled by the scammers, and it's a fraud. And they're going to ask you to update some sort of personal information, or maybe put in your credit card number to get this package, information that's really valuable to them to commit further fraud. So you don't want to click on these. Some tips. Again, if you receive some sort of unsolicited message like this, don't click on the links. Think about, were you expecting a package to be delivered? Or did you recently send a package to someone? Did you sign up for some sort of text notifications through the service? If you are expecting a package or tried to send something to someone, open up your own web browser again. Don't click on the links in these emails or texts, and go to that company's website, or you can call their customer service and confirm whether this message is authentic or not. That's the much better way to handle these issues. The bad guys really want you to click on the links in their message, so whatever you do, don't click on their links. So one of the final scams I want to discuss is charity and disaster fraud. So when bad things happen, like hurricanes or earthquakes and other disasters, many of us are really moved. We want to donate money to these relief efforts. But these frauds often play on our good intentions, and they spike after natural disasters or major events, unfortunately. So some people solicit donations for organizations that do no real work. They may have a charity name and a bank account, but no volunteers or employees who will use that money to really help those who are in need. Instead, they're really trying to scam us out of money that we were hoping would help those who are victims of these natural disasters or other events. So these can come in a lot of different forms. We see them through email. Sometimes there's social media posts saying, give to this relief cause. Crowdfunding platforms like GoFundMe and things. Sometimes you'll get cold calls on the phone, and there's other forms as well. So in order to avoid becoming a victim of these scams, it's recommended that you give only to established charities, either those that you've worked with before or those that trust and have a good name in the community, so that you know your money is going to a good cause and will be put to the intended purpose. But do be aware that some scammers will try to create fake charities that use names that are very similar to legitimate groups. So they'll mimic these names or mimic the websites to make it look like you're donating to a legitimate group. So just be careful and look out for those names that you may kind of sound familiar, but may not be exactly on point. If you plan to give to an organization that you aren't familiar with, you can always research that group's track record. So there's groups out there like the Better Business Bureau, along with several online sites that offer ratings of charitable groups. If an organization you're not familiar with asks you to donate through cash or gift cards, virtual currency, or maybe to wire money, it's probably a scam. It's different if your church or religious institution is putting together a fundraiser and they ask for a gift card for a gift basket. That's someone you know and trust. But if you get a cold call asking you to send gift cards, that's probably not a legitimate charity. Also remember that, a legitimate charity will take a check, they'll take your credit card and offer you a receipt for your records because they know you're going to file taxes and put that possibly as a tax deduction. But with any type of giving, just be cautious with these and do your research. Okay, so I've talked quite a bit about some of the common fraud schemes. Hopefully I didn't overload you with too much information, but these fraudsters are pretty creative and they're always coming up with new ways to steal your hard-earned money. So I thought we should talk a little bit more about preventing frauds in general. I mentioned this earlier, and it's worth repeating that it's important to never respond to those unsolicited calls or those emails or texts that are asking for some sort of personal identification, some sort of personal information. Unless you initiate that interaction and you're dealing with someone that you trust, do not provide your information. So when it comes to emails and texts, also be very cautious of attachments or links from senders you don't know. These can often carry some sort of malicious code that can harm your computer or direct you to some sort of website that will try to steal your information. Again, a lot of these are these phishing schemes that we spoke about. Remember, the scammers are pretty savvy too, and they'll be able to copy emails, they can copy websites to make them look legitimate, but it's important not to fall for these scams. A few more tips. Be alert to potential phishing attacks, like that UPS, FedEx package delivery example we discussed. There's a lot of variants on these types of schemes. They're attempting to gain your personal information. They all have the same goal. Also be leery of what we call social engineering. So social engineering is really an attempt to manipulate people into revealing some sort of confidential or personal information that could be used for fraud. Have you ever been on social media and seen some of those surveys where they ask you to list some fun facts, maybe like the year you graduated, or your first pet's name, or the first kind of car you had, questions like that? If you think about it, a lot of those questions actually match up to legitimate websites and the questions that they use when you want to recover your password. So it's not a coincidence, right? It's a form of social engineering where these scammers are trying to get you to reveal personal facts that they might be able to use to commit fraud by taking over your account on some sort of site. So be leery of those kind of things as well. I believe I also mentioned before that it's a good idea to check your credit report to look for any kind of suspicious activity. You can actually get a free credit report from each of the 3 credit reporting agencies per year through this site, annualcreditreport.com. So you can request one from all the 3 major reporting agencies at once, so you can see what they're all saying about you at the same time. Or if you wanted to stagger that so you can monitor your credit throughout the year, you can request one every few months from a different reporting agency so you can continuously monitor your credit year-round. I know a lot of people that do that. They set it up every 3 or 4 months. They request a report from a different agency. And since there's 3 agencies, they can kind of monitor their credit throughout the year that way. Again, you'd be looking for things on there like any accounts you didn't know that you might have been opened in your name, or any loans or things like that that might impact your credit and show that there's some sort of fraud. If you do see fraudulent activity on there and believe you're some sort of victim, it's important to immediately report it to your financial institution. It's also recommended that you notify those 3 credit reporting bureaus and ask for a fraud alert to be placed on your credit history. It'll basically instruct them to contact you if someone tries to open a credit card or a loan in your name. And if you've been a victim of some sort of identity theft, it's also not a bad idea to contact the IRS, and they have a form, it's called the Identity Theft Affidavit, and that notifies the government that you've been a victim of identity theft, and it alerts them if someone tries to file a false tax return so that they can receive your tax refund. That's another form of fraud that we see from time to time. People that are trying to steal your tax information, file false taxes, and then take your refund from you. So there's a website, identitytheft.com, that has some additional resources, and it can probably help you navigate this process if you do become a victim of identity theft. You should also report any fraud to law enforcement. If it's a phone, email, or internet scam, again, we recommend you use this IC3.gov, the Internet Crime Complaint Center, to report this information. And as I mentioned, they bundle cases that are similar maybe in similar geographic regions or similar types of fraud that they're seeing across the country, and then they refer those to the appropriate law enforcement agency for investigation. So they could come to the FBI, they could go to the Department of Treasury or the IRS, just depending on the type of fraud it is, and then we'll investigate it further. So finally, I wanted to wrap up with some kind of good general practices. It's always important to trust your instincts, right? If it seems too good to be true, it probably is. So if that item you want is $100 at the store at the mall, and you see it for $25 on some website you've never seen before, that's probably a scam. It's best just to walk away from this temptation and just let this purchase go. It's always a good idea also to slow down. I think scammers are often trying to create this false sense of urgency to get you to make a poor decision, kind of a rush to judgment. This is especially true in some of the phone scams where they're talking to you directly, and they try to elevate the intensity and add stress to the situation, so you're going to give them what they want. So if you're able just to slow down and think through it, that is best. And that way you're not letting anyone pressure you into anything you might not want to do. Also, always good to ask questions and do research, right? Scammers don't want to answer a lot of questions. They want you to say yes. They want you to send them money. They don't want to answer a bunch of questions. So if you're not sure, if it's over the phone, you can always hang up. If they're persistent, you can ask a lot of questions and then try and verify the accuracy through other means, right? Look at the internet, talk to someone you trust, which is the next one. In any of these instances, it's always good to just talk to people you trust. There's a lot of good people out there that genuinely want to help you. So if you're unsure about a situation, just ask someone you trust for their opinion, and chances are pretty good that they're going to guide you in the right direction. Sometimes it's good just to have another set of eyes on your situation and someone from the outside to advise you on what might be best to do. And then finally, it's all right to say no. Don't be afraid to say no. It's okay to walk away or just hang up on these scammers. They're motivated by greed. They'll do just about anything to get your hard-earned money. So it's okay to say no. It's okay to be impolite about it as well. And that might go against your character, but you're really dealing with some shady people. So they don't have feelings. They only want to steal your money. You're a potential victim to them. And when you hang up on them or are rude to them and disconnect the call, they're just moving on to the next person. They're not taking it personally. They're just moving on to their next victim. So it's okay to say no. It's okay to be a little rude to them as well, even if that goes against your character. Finally, I just want to end by saying, be smart. Use your instincts. Think about the resources around you that you can use to help maintain the money that you have earned. So law enforcement and those around you really care. We don't want you to become another victim, and that's why we do outreach like this. If you want to learn more about these topics, there's some additional information on our website, the FBI.gov website listed here. And if you happen to be on social media like Twitter, we also post a lot of information about scams, emerging scams and threats, and other resources on our Twitter page, which is at FBI Cincinnati. And that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Todd, for your time tonight and sharing common scams with us and how to avoid them. As mentioned at the beginning, we will open up to Q&A. If you had any questions come to mind during the presentation, please use your chat feature and we'll make sure we get those asked. So we'll go ahead and get started. The first question I have, and I know you mentioned phishing emails earlier and how to avoid those types of scams, but is there a way to specifically stop scammers from sending those emails?
Sure. There are some different ways you can do that. One is going through the Direct Marketing Association. Their website, if you Google Direct Marketing Association, there is a way to get off some of these mail scams as well as email scams. So you can limit the amount of junk mail you're receiving in your mailbox, as well as some of the junk mail you're receiving in your email inbox. There's 2 separate forms on their website that you can fill out. I believe the mail, to stop some of your mail, it may cost $1 or $2 to process that, but I believe it's good for like 10 years. So you might want to check that out. You do also have to list some personal information on there, but it is a legitimate site. Again, it's the Direct Marketing Association. There's also the do not call list, which you may be aware of to filter some of those unwanted phone calls. You can search for the do not call list, which is run, I believe, by the Federal Trade Commission, and you can be placed on that list as well to avoid some of that. As you may know, political calls are not a part of that. We just went through the election season, and politicians and political groups are exempt from that, but any kind of direct marketer does have to comply with those rules. Now, that being said, that may limit some of the things that you receive, either mail, phone calls, or email, but scammers don't necessarily abide by those rules. They're not checking those lists like they're supposed to by law. Again, they're not operating under the same rules that a legitimate company would, so they still may be sending you those scam emails. So always be on alert for those and just try to delete them without opening them or clicking on any links.
Thank you. The next question we have is, I currently use LifeLock for monitoring and protecting my account and presence online. Would you say that's adequate protection?
That's a good question. And so I can't, being a government employee, endorse any specific products or anything like that. But I think any steps that you might be taking to try to protect your identity are probably good ones. You're thinking about it, you're trying to put up some walls to isolate yourself from any kind of attacks from these fraudsters. So that is helpful. Companies like that usually monitor your credit and things. They're going to pull things that might look suspicious. They're not always going to be able to block them from happening, but if you do become a victim, they're going to be helpful by providing resources to you and try to get you back on your feet as soon as possible as well. So those types of things can definitely be a plus. I know they have fees and things like that, so they might not be for everyone, but it's never a bad idea to be looking into ways like that you can protect yourself.
The next question is sort of along the same lines, but do you have any recommendations or steps that people should take to protect their home or property?
Sure. I think that goes more probably into like a physical security that they're thinking of their home or property. So when we talk about those things, we usually talk about things like security cameras and security alarm systems. Again, any kind of protection is probably better than nothing. And if you want to invest in those kind of things, cameras have come down a great deal in price, and they can be had at Costco and Sam's Club and those kind of warehouse stores for not too expensive of money for decent camera systems these days. So it's never a bad idea. These camera systems can protect you, and they can also help law enforcement. So if there's a burglary in your neighborhood, maybe your house wasn't burglarized, but maybe the car that the burglar was drove by your house. So those can be great tools for law enforcement after there are crimes committed as well, to help investigate those crimes, solve those crimes, put the people in jail that may have committed those crimes. So those kind of things can be very valuable. Again, cameras and security systems obviously have fees involved with them, but if you're willing to invest in those, they're never a bad idea.
Great. And then in terms of social media, are there things I should avoid posting?
Sure, that's a great question. I'll tell you up front that I'm not on social media. I'm a pretty private person, and the less information I put out there, I feel the better. I think there are people out there, unfortunately, that try to use information against you. Some of that goes into the social engineering that we talk about. These surveys that could be on these social media websites where they look innocuous, they look harmless. They just want to know when you graduated and who your favorite football team is and your pet's name and things like that. But a lot of them can be social engineering scams where people are trying to collect that information to possibly use against you. So I'd be very guarded in what I do put out there on social media. One of the things we do see a lot, and you've probably heard this before, is vacation photos are a big thing. If you're posting vacation photos while you're on vacation, you're basically telling people that there's no one in your house right now. So it could be open for a burglar or robber to go visit your house if they can figure that out from your social media. And sometimes they can. Sometimes you put on there where you live or what town you live in. Sometimes your photos have information on them that can geo-identify where you are in the metadata in the photos. So you just have to be careful about that. I always recommend, if you're on social media, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Just be cautious. Limit the people that can see your profile, your pictures, and your posts and things like that to people that you actually know. So lock down the security settings is always a good recommendation. And think about the people that you let into that inner circle. Do you really know that person who wants to be your friend online? Is that someone that would be a friend in real life, or is that just maybe a casual acquaintance? Because when you let them in, you're letting all their friends in as well. So just be careful about that. Those are the kind of talks I have with my kids as well. Just because you met someone online doesn't mean you know them in real life, right? And so just like you wouldn't invite them into your car or your house necessarily because you don't really know them, same thing online. You don't need to be friends with them online just because it's someone you've passed in the school hallway or something like that. So just be careful about who you're letting into that inner circle.
We have a couple more questions. The next one is, are there really coronavirus scams?
So yes, unfortunately, fraudsters take advantage of all kinds of current events, and coronavirus is definitely one of them. So we've seen lots of different coronavirus scams. They come in all different sizes and methods. Originally, when hand sanitizer and different goods at the supermarket, toilet paper and things like that were hard to come by, we saw all kinds of scams and emails going around. You may have received them in your email box saying, hey, we have hand sanitizer and it's cheap, great price, order yours now. A lot of those were scams. People spent money on these kind of pop-up overnight companies that never delivered these products. So be careful of things like that if there are shortages of these kind of supplies. We've seen emails and phone calls and postings on the internet about coronavirus testing that isn't real. You can get an at-home kit for testing, things like that. Again, these are usually scams. They're either going to charge you an exorbitant amount of money and send you something that doesn't work, or they're not going to deliver it at all. So be careful of scams like that, trying to sell testing supplies. We've seen also frauds against the government related to coronavirus, things like people claiming that they had a business and they need an emergency loan from the government to recover from that when they actually didn't have a business, but that's more government related. And then we've also seen people trying to get your stimulus check. So those have all gone out. Hopefully you received what was allocated to you. I don't know if there'll be a second round of stimulus or not, but if there is, just be careful. We had again, online and over the phone, people pretending to be from the IRS or some sort of government agency saying, hey, we're trying to give you your stimulus money, but we need some of your personal information. It's not going through to your bank. We need your new routing number and account number. And unfortunately, some people fell victim to that and gave their account numbers to these scammers thinking they're from the IRS or another government agency. And instead of getting a stimulus check, they lost money in their account due to these scams. So be very careful about those as well.
And then the last question we have is, what are work from home scams?
Oh, sure. Work from home scams, we do see from time to time as well, and they kind of fall in some different categories, but oftentimes people see some sort of advertisement, hey, work at home, earn $5,000 a month or whatever it may be. And you may be assembling parts or putting together stuffing envelopes and sealing them and sending them. Maybe you're just cashing checks for someone, or you're a mystery shopper. Lots of times these are scams. So really do your research on these and see who's behind these, what the companies are, what their reputation is, if they're reputable or not. Most of these are scams, but they're out there all over the place. And so what you see in some of these where you have to assemble things at home or stuff envelopes, they're going to try and charge you a fee up front. They're going to say, yeah, we'll send you all the things that you need, but it costs $500 to take some online classes and get us to ship this stuff to you so you can start your job, but you'll make that up in no time. So if they're asking for money in advance for you to work, that's a red flag, right? Most employers don't ask you to pay them money. They're hiring you so they can pay you money to do work. So watch out for that. We also see that some of these people unwittingly become what we call money mules. And so these so-called companies will send them checks, and they might ask you to open up a bank account, and they want you to cash this check and then send some of the proceeds to someone else, and you get to keep a small percentage of that. Well, that's actually being what we call a money mule again. You're basically laundering money for someone without knowing it. Lots of times the people involved in this, have no idea they're being used by some sort of criminal organization, but that's exactly what's happening. The criminals have some sort of checks or money that they've received. In order to make it look like it's legitimate, they're going to send it to you, have you cash the check. You're going to be responsible for that check if it bounces as you send on money to someone else. So be very careful of anything involving checks, cashing money, opening bank accounts, things like that. They're usually scams. And then one of the final ones I mentioned are these mystery shopper scams. Again, most of these are scams. There are some legitimate mystery shoppers out there, but not many, and there's a lot of advertisements for them. Again, you can make money by just shopping at your favorite stores. They're usually scams, so do your research if someone's trying to hire you for one of these jobs as well.
Great. Well, thanks again, Todd, for taking the time to join us tonight. That concludes our Q&A session. We hope you've enjoyed tonight's topic and found the information valuable. On the screen, you can see a list of our upcoming webinars. Please visit our events page to learn more and register. And with that, thank you all for joining us tonight and have a wonderful rest of your evening.